priorities for working in global HR can be complex, but the things that remain the same and often consistent are the fact that most companies over the last few years have been concentrating on downsizing, restructuring and transformation. The difference in moving into a global arena is very often that's part of a company's growth strategy.
Making sure your HR strategy is absolutely aligned with the business strategy is at the heart of any role in HR, whether it's a global one or a local one. But it becomes more important in a global one because you've got to understand not just the strategy, but the local deployment of it.
Global consistency, but local flexibility. So that really means that you need to keep your company identity and culture aligned throughout the world, but also realize that there are different needs and wants in different countries.
HR is all about understanding the heartbeat of the organisation. And by that I mean, employees, what their hopes, their aspirations and their motivations are. Obtaining that information in a global context is very challenging, but you need to find ways to do that.
There are lots of global organisations which have real scale in a market, and if you employ thousands of employees thousands of people in a market or a country, you can do all sorts of things. You've got an infrastructure. When you're a high growth company, you're kind of at the pioneering end of HR. You're opening offices with 10 and 20 people, and your infrastructure is very, very different. And some of the HR challenges are really basic. What's the legal entity? How do we run a payroll in Argentina? How do we pay people for the first time in China?
I think there's a number of challenges in my role at the moment. I think probably the first one is how we take existing practices around things like talent and reward, how we export those from a European environment down into different markets. And I think that can be challenging simply as you cannot just take, in my experience, everything you've made successful in Europe and force it into a different market. So I think that's the first one. I think the second one is specific to the industry I work in, and that we're very often dealing with engineering skills. And I think they're scarce skills in most emerging markets, and that can make it very, very difficult to actually attract and retain the right levels of engineers down in these different markets.
I think the main differences between a domestic and a global HR role, well, first of all, there's one very simple one. With a domestic one, you don't have the time differences. I think one of the real issues with working globally is trying to get people together, even if it's on a video conference. If you've got an office in Sydney trying to talk to London and LA at the same time, that's a real problem. The second one is actually, again, getting people together physically, the costs involved. If you're trying to do some training, some leadership training, for example, trying to get everybody together, that presents a real add-on of costs. And the third thing that I think is important to think about is the different kinds of law, particularly to do with tax, that you do have to have an understanding of, at least learning the red flags and knowing when to speak to the experts so that you don't fall flat on your face.
Working in a domestic environment, you get very used to understanding everything from end to end, having really clear, in-depth knowledge. And when you go to working globally, you're working in a completely new environment where all the norms that you've come to accept may not hold true. And actually you have to get used to knowing a little about a lot of things rather than very deep understanding, and that can be really challenging.
I do think there is a slight trend towards nationalism. I do think people want more control locally, and I think we will see the days of very central HR functions kind of not being quite so powerful, but empowering local markets and local operating companies within a framework more and more.
I think global HR will continue to become more global in terms that people are much more connected now with the way they can communicate via different social media platforms. People's horizons really open up, and I think that gives us real challenges as HR professionals. People are much more likely to communicate in different ways, to think about different levels of mobility and different possibilities for themselves.
I think over the next 3 years, global HR is going to really assess its priorities around centralising some of its functions, but really questioning the elements that cannot be centralised and maintaining a local approach where it adds value. And for me, that really is in the HR business partnering side, where face-to-face interaction and local cultural context really add significant value.
In recruitment, we look specifically at people that are globally aware and have global ambitions. We also look at more international placements, so we see more and more people going to work abroad to build up their skills and knowledge. And we also have international communities of practice where everybody on certain subjects in the business share their knowledge and experience internationally.
I think the increased globalisation of the work that we do has really made the HR team much more exciting. We do lots of things now on an international basis, whether that's kind of common standards for our company, but also the work that our HR function has done has to be more global. There's a new set of skill sets that for smaller companies like ours around kind of tax planning, globalisation of the workforce, common frameworks, means that we've had to rethink some of our benefits programs, had to rethink about how our reward function operates in a different way, from just either a UK or a US centric model to a true global one.
For someone who's taking on a global HR role, the most important thing is to be globally visible. So don't only focus on your own country, focus on the company as a whole and be visible in the organisation.
I know personally that I've benefited enormously when I've worked in different markets and different territories, and that's been hugely beneficial to my career. I'm keen that for both organisations and indeed people who work in HR, trying to move them internationally will do nothing but help them.
Think about the travel. You're going to have to travel, and it's not glamorous. Sitting in the airport lounge of Madrid Airport at 3 o'clock in the morning is not glamour.
I think some of the skills global HR needs are patience, tenacity and creativity. Things take a lot longer when you're dealing with our overseas employees. And you need to think a bit more creatively about what it is that how you're going to approach that particular issue or challenge.
You've got to trust people, and you've got to recruit great people and make sure they're really clear about what you're trying to achieve, and then trust and empower them to get on. You can't look over someone's shoulder when they're 5,000 miles away, and therefore you've got to make sure you're really clear and they really understand what it is you're trying to achieve.
Listening and then using your coaching skills to really delve into the crux of the matter is really important. Don't assume anything.